Hello and welcome to another history episode of Keep the Flame Alive, the podcast for fans of the Olympics and Paralympics. If you love the games, we are the show for you. I am your host, Jill Jaracz, joined as always by my lovely co-host, Alison Brown. Alison, hello, g'day. Last time.
I was going to say, I'm a little sad. This is our last visit to Sydney, and it has been so much fun looking
Yes.
back on the stuff that we remembered. And we said at the beginning, there's a lot of Sydney we remember. And then as we were going along, we realized how much of Sydney we either didn't remember or didn't know, and how fantastic these games really, really were.
They were, and we'll be looking at Legacy today, and we'll be looking at the Paralympics closing ceremony today, which had to be a show to
Because
not miss.
we talked about Olympic closing ceremony last time, but there was so much closing ceremony antics that we couldn't contain it into one episode. So we had to split it up because, as you would expect from the other three ceremonies that we've talked to, the Paralympic closing ceremony did not disappoint.
Excellent. I will look forward to that. But first, we need to give a shout out to our patron of the week, Lori Luscree.
Again, someone who does not disappoint.
Lori has been such a good supporter of the show for years and years. She's bailed us out of walking around the streets of Paris late at night.
She sent us the sweetest note when we were in Paris. Like, I'm worried about you ladies. Here's some cab fare. So thank you so much for that, Lori. Not just for the cab fare, but for the note. That kind of bolstered us in some down moments in Paris.
Yes. And we truly appreciate how much you support the show, how much fun it is to hang out with you on the group and on other social media platforms. And it's fun to hang out with you there and have you be part of the Shuklistan community. So thank you so much. And if you too would like a shout out, you can go to flamealivepod.com/support to find out more. Let's get into Paralympics closing ceremony.
So this is the last party of the games, and it ended on October 29th. Again, we're back at Stadium Australia. And the show started off with a bang, because usually the fireworks are at the end. No, they put fireworks right off the top, and it was a lot of fireworks. But now we have our favorite element that we discovered last time, the large inflatable creatures that have been used in the other ceremonies. So we've got fish, snakes, and the demon chicken.
Right. Good.
Can't have a ceremony in Sydney without the demon chicken. And they've all got rhythmic drums playing in the background. And then a big sign comes on the Jumbotron that says, "Don't try this at home." And why would we need that? Because we've got aerialists from the Flying Fruit Fly Circus, which is Australia's national youth circus. And they performed off a 12-meter high truss, spinning on ropes, swinging across trapezes. They have people doing the silk rope thing where you spin down. That always freaked me out more than anything else, because I'm always like, that rope is going to tear. And their skin was painted green, and they sported turquoise, orange, and purple wigs. Okay. So next we get the business portion of the night, where IPC president at the time, Dr. Robert Stedward, called the Sydney Games a, quote, sheer delight and an absolutely outstanding event. And he, like Juan Antonio at the Olympics, called these Paralympics the best ever. And Dr. Stedward presented Dr. John Grant, who was the president of the Sydney Paralympics Organizing Committee, with the Paralympic Gold Order. And the fun thing about these orders, both the Paralympic and the Olympic, they are really snazzy. And they have always been snazzy. They're these giant emblems with the big, heavy chains. It looks like something out of a medieval university. And I love that. And so next, Dr. Stedward declared the games closed, and the flag, featuring an earlier version of the Agitos, is lowered and marched out of the stadium, and the cauldron is extinguished. So now that the formal portion is done, we get to the fun part. So the flag is handed over to the deputy mayor of Athens, followed up by a performance by the millennial choirs of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, performing the Greek hymn, Intelligible Son of Justice. Sounds appropriately Greek. We get 200 children in the choir, because you can't have a ceremony without a children's choir. And these are children from the Greco-Australian community. So check on that piece. And now it's carnival time. There's Lizzie, our amazing frilled lizard mascot, dancing with stilt walkers and Sydney teenagers. And finally, the Paralympians themselves get to take the field, and the beach balls in the shape of gumball machines, and they have balls inside the balls.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. They start flying around the field with the athletes. So now we get the closing concert. First up, a very young Keith Urban.
Get out.
And yes, his hair was always that bad. So then we get Jimmy Barnes and the Seekers, the Whitlams, Wicked Beat Sound System, who is as funky as it sounds, and Graham Connors performing the official anthem for the Sydney Paralympics called Being Here. And it sounds appropriately, oh, it's an anthem for Paralympics. So on the broadcast, we get lots of close-ups of the athletes dancing on the field, tossing around the giant gumball machines and interacting with the performers. So it seems like the athletes really enjoyed this concert and really got into it. The mood coming through the broadcast was just so excited and joyful, and thankfully not as freakish, if I can say that, as some of the Olympic pieces, and also much shorter than the Olympic one, as was the case. So the concert closes with the most appropriate song that they could come up with, called The Carnival is Over. And they closed with a rocket flying overhead, more fireworks, and more fireworks, and then the announcement that the show is over and it is time to say goodbye to Sydney for the last time.
Aw, that is
And the
sad.
demon chicken. Nothing has made me happier in our adventures in Sydney as my time with the demon chicken. I hope he's still around and appears at Sydney parades and events and things.
Excellent. Excellent. So closing ceremony, how do you rate that one?
You know, it's a little hard when you look at Paralympic closing ceremonies from this era, because clearly they were smaller scale. The Paralympics were a smaller scale. The money wasn't quite there as it is today. But man, it was a goodie. I would at least give it an 8 out of 10.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was a good one, and it had the right blend of the serious emotion and the joy and the sadness of it ending. But most importantly, it looked like the athletes had a fantastic time.
Good. Excellent. Excellent. You know who might have an excellent time at a Paralympics closing ceremony?
Us?
That would be us, hopefully, if we could get to Milan and cover the Olympics and Paralympics as we intend to. We have planned to do 32 daily shows from Milano Cortina, both the Olympics and the Paralympics, but undertaking that endeavor is pretty expensive, and we need the support from Shuklistan to get there. Our team Keep the Flame Alive. You mean the world to us, listeners, and many of you have stepped up. We're over 50% of the way to our goal.
We're almost at the 2/3 point. I love fractions. We're almost at the 2/3 point. So if you can, throw us a little bit over that barrier, that's always a great milestone to hit.
Yes. So if you visit flamealivepod.com, you'll see a pop-up there. It's also at the top of our website to support our fundraiser. We have a lot of thank you gifts that are very cool. Doing something new with show shout-outs this year. So that's cool. You could be a mascot. Your pet could be a mascot.
You yourself could be a mascot.
Yeah,
honestly.
if you wanted to. Yeah.
I would go for that, having human mascots. I mean, hey, little Lilyhammer did it, so I would totally do that if you want your kids to be our mascot for a day. I'd be cool with that.
Yeah, I would as well. So yes, flamealivepod.com, and you'll see the pop-up. Help us get to Milano Cortina and let you know whether or not those Paralympic ceremonies are as cool as the ones from Sydney. I have got legacy.
Yes, so
let's
games
buckle
are
up.
over. So now we finally said goodbye to Sydney. We've got 25 years of legacy that you've come up with.
Yes, and these games provided some amazing moments in sports history. They brought the world together in a celebration that was full of Australian hospitality. David Meadow reported in the Daily Telegraph that some of the 50,000 volunteers proudly wore their uniforms for years after these games. Both IOC President Juan Antonio Samaranch and the IPC President Robert Stedward both pronounced them the best games ever. How did that pan out in terms of legacy? Well, it's complicated. So let's first look at the venues. We are still in the era of big construction for the Olympics, and Sydney built 18 new venues for these games.
Wow. That is a lot.
It's a lot, including a massive 640-hectare site known as Sydney Olympic Park, which contained the Olympic Stadium, several other venues, a grand boulevard, a train station, and 430 hectares of park and wetlands. So, building that site meant undertaking this massive environmental remediation of toxic waste project. And it was one of the largest contaminated sites in any Australian city. 20 years later, regional economist Terry Ronsley said that if it weren't for the Olympics, that wasteland might still exist. And instead, the New South Wales government spent 130 million Australian dollars to clean up the site. And that effort transformed the area, also transformed nearby suburbs. And even though Olympic Stadium itself gave the city its first large multi-purpose stadium, the New South Wales government toyed with demolishing it in 2017. Right?
Why?
You build a giant stadium to tear it down 17 years later. I mean, if we're in the middle of a big stadium issue here in Cleveland, and the fact that developers or sports team owners want to build giant, expensive stadiums mostly on taxpayer dollars, and then tear them down within a couple of decades is just flabbergasting to me, why they think that we have these open pocketbooks. But that did not happen. The stadium turned out to be not great for what the city needed. It's too big. It's got lousy sightlines. However, they did keep it. They refurbished it. Again, that wasn't the first time it refurbished the stadium. So think about the money that went into that too. After the games, its capacity was reduced from 110,000 to 83,500. It's still a giant stadium. It is now home to 3 rugby league teams, a rugby union team, and national teams for football and rugby. It hosts 50 plus events per year, and in the 23-24 fiscal year welcomed 11.9 million visitors. But the park, the Sydney Olympic Park, has this dubious legacy. The park lands have been incredible, a huge success, enjoyed by over 10 million people annually. They take really good care of them and are good stewards of the environment with that. As of the 20th anniversary of the games, the rest of the park doesn't really live up to the hopes, in part because there was no long-term vision. There's a ton of cement to walk on. The road design of the time didn't help. So back then, winding roads were popular. And if they had made a grid instead, that would have been more walkable. So now you have this area that's not super walkable. It's not really accessible by train. There's a train stop there, but it only goes to one station. So you basically, if you wanted to go to Olympic Park, you currently have to get on a train and then take it to the one stop that you can transfer to the Olympic Park line. And it's one stop there. So it's not horrible, but it's complicated. It's just kind of this offshoot thing. That ends up meaning that people drive in, they go to their event, and they leave.
So
And
it's
that
not like they're getting the experience of the venue. It's all just this, I go to my concert and then turn around and drive out.
Exactly. So that means it's been really hard to build a vibrant business district around the area. And the athletes' village is just far enough away that the people who live there, and it's really only a couple kilometers, but it's far enough away that people who live there don't hang out in the Olympic Park district, apparently. As James Wyrick, a professor in urban development and design at the University of South Wales, who criticized the plans for the district, said in 2020 that the place was too big and that everything was too spread out to support a vibrant urban atmosphere. And he said, quote, At the moment, we had the worst of both worlds. Neither a great sports park nor an area with an urban identity or character. The vast paved area in front of the stadium creates the emptiness of the place. It is so empty at times that energy leaks out, end quote. And I will say, I did find a lot more about the 20th anniversary legacy than I did of 25 years and ran out of time. But it's interesting to see. I don't think uh, there are some changes that are in the works. The New South Wales government is building a new underground metro line. It's the Sydney Metro West, which will go from the Central Business District west to Westmead, and it has just completed the tunneling for the western end. Sydney Olympic Park will have a new station along this line, so it will be more accessible and easier to get to in 2032 when it opens.
Oh. Well, at least they're able to correct the mistake
Mhm.
that
It's
it
just
wasn't.
taking a
It just
long
takes
time.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's parks there, there's stuff and people do use the pool, they do use some of the other venues, but yeah, it really is you got the feeling that it's not as hustle and bustle as you would hope. I saw some claims that the area was like the 5th largest in Sydney in terms of economic output, but that also doesn't mean necessarily like do people go there to work and then they go home? Or do they go and they stay? So, it's a mixed bag with the Olympic Park. The Athletes Village is a different success story. So they turned that into a solar-powered residential area within the suburb of Newington, and it's still one of the most sustainable neighborhoods in Australia. Saw that one of the homes is currently for sale. You too could live in the Olympic Village. It's a 261-meter square, 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that's estimated to cost 1.79 million Australian dollars.
So it's sustainable, not affordable.
Right. I think there's a problem with Australian housing anyway, so you have the same issue. The Athletes Village also contained some temporary villas, and those were shipped to different locations around the country. 12 ended up in Rainbow Beach, north of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, and they're part of a caravan park that serves tourists. So you could go to this, it's a bunch of little cabins, and some of the cabins are left over from the Olympics.
Oh, it's like in Montreal, how sometimes you can rent some of the people have the spaces that you can Airbnb for the.
No, no, this is like a little they have these things called caravan parks there, and they're really cool, where they're little, like, cabins, and they're
Oh.
all situated in this park, and I think if you had a trailer, you could bring your trailer and hook it up, but, they do have little cabins or villas, for lack of a better word, and basically you and your family rent a little cabin, and they have a pool or whatever there. It's a step up from a campground, I would say, but
Nice.
similar to that element. So, yes, they've got some of these there. So that I thought was really cool. How about the rest of the venues? You will be happy to hear that all of the new venues remain in use.
Excellent.
The 3 temporary venues for beach volleyball, triathlon, and road cycling were dismantled, while temporary venues saved money. 25 years later, Sydney 2000 beach volleyball gold medalist Carrie Pothurst said on sportnation.nz that the gains were incredible, but the legacy wasn't there in terms of beach volleyball because access to facilities is what fosters the next generation of players. And I got the impression that if they had made a permanent site, it would have attracted more people to the sport. It's that six of one, half a dozen of the other kind of thing. If you have a stadium on a beach, does that help, or does it take away from the beach element of it? There are 9 existing venues that Sydney had. 8 of them are still standing and are in use. The one that was demolished was the Sydney Entertainment Centre, which was used for volleyball. It was opened in 1983 and demolished 33 years later in 2016. So again, we have another stadium that was only lasted 30 some years. It had been a much used concert, sporting, and theater venue, but now it's a residential development, part of the redevelopment of Darling Harbor. So housing is an issue in a way that's good. I won't go through all the stadiums that still exist, but the Sydney Superdome, which had artistic gymnastics, trampoline, and basketball, is now called the Kudos Bank Arena. For the year ending 2023, it ranked in the top 10 of Billboard's venue rankings for around the world.
Good for them.
Although the marathon venue no longer exists, the marathon itself lives on. The marathon test event was transformed into the TCS Sydney Marathon. It still has the Sydney 2000 start location in North Sydney. The route includes running over the Sydney Harbour Bridge, around the Rocks, the Circular Quay, and Centennial Park. The finish is in front of the Sydney Opera House. This race has grown to become the largest marathon in Australia and is a World Athletics Platinum Label marathon. And in November 2024, it was added to the Abbott World Marathon Majors as the newest one of those. And in 2025, it had 35,000 runners from over 120 countries. And for the 25th anniversary, the race volunteers wore uniforms inspired by the Sydney Games.
And probably some people broke out their uniforms, their
Yeah,
volunteer
yeah, they
uniforms,
did.
and came out and said, "I'm an OG."
Another element of the games was the country's relationship with its indigenous people, which was highlighted in the ceremonies. In May 2000, ahead of the games, 250,000 people walked across the Sydney Harbour Bridge in support of Indigenous reconciliation. So the topic was really a main talking point of the day. Per the 1991 Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation Act, the national government was supposed to achieve reconciliation by 2001. The act didn't really specify what that meant, so no one really knew if the goals were met by that deadline. The 1997 Bringing Them Home report about the stolen generations of children taken from their Aboriginal and Torres Strait homes recommended that all Australian governments apologize for these policies and practices. And by 1999, so ahead of the Games, states and territory governments had done that. But it wasn't until February 13, 2008, that the federal government formally apologized for its actions. On the conversation.com, David Rowe wrote that although Sydney 2000 did not do much to change the lives of Aboriginals, it was the catalyst for how Australia represented itself, which from then on always had a deep, serious Indigenous presence in everything, which we see that in the Team Australian uniforms. They all have to have an Indigenous element to them. And of course, let's talk money.
Your favorite topic.
I love it. But ahead of any games, economist forecasts are rosy, and KPMG predicted that Sydney 2000 would cause $7.1 billion in growth between 91 and 2004. It's a long time, to be quite honest. In 2007, modeling done by academics John Madden and James Giska found that between 97 and 2005, so we're not really talking apples to apples here, there was a $2.1 billion decline in household and government consumption.
So even if you're not apples to apples, you are definitely in a rotten apple category.
Yeah, right.
Because it's not like there was some growth, but maybe not as much. No, we have a decline.
Yeah. Another economic analysis found that construction spurred a 5% growth in the city's economy during the 2 years ahead of the games. But after 2000, the annual growth rate plummeted and remained low for several years. You build 18 new venues. What happens next? The games are not fully responsible for that decline, though. All told, the final price was pretty big. In 2002, the New South Wales Auditor General released a report saying that the games cost 6.484 billion Australian dollars. The government paid for just over 2 billion. It estimated that games tourism brought in 653 million, but all told, the games lost 1.326 billion. In 2020, researchers from Oxford University noted that Sydney blew its budget by 90%.
Oh, wow. 90%. Well,
That's
if we look at the next couple games after this, Athens, that 90% they would have been happy with.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And same with Rio is way off the charts too.
Right. And China and Beijing 2008 will never know what the real numbers were.
Right. But the people of New South Wales saw that as an investment in public works, and they were pretty okay with it because the government didn't really feel any backlash at the polls, apparently. Organizationally, the Sydney 2000 Olympics was the first games that had a formal evaluation and knowledge transfer program in place to help future hosts. That was kind of a big deal because I think everybody beforehand was running just kinda on the fly, or they had to hope that the final report that the previous games had put out said enough to guide them on how to do things. But now we have a formal knowledge transfer program. We see that ourselves when we've got like, I talked with some LA 2028 people at, Paris 2024. You famously rode with Paris 2024 people in Beijing, got rescued.
I'll be forever grateful. So they're thinking about it ahead of time, which was different than what was done at that time.
In terms of the Paralympic movement, Sydney was a game changer. These games had a big challenge in that Atlanta 1996 did not put in the same effort and organization into the 96 Paralympics. That set back the strides made by Seoul 88 and Barcelona 1992. Sydney opted to have its Olympic and Paralympic organizing committees partner to put on both games and the Cultural Olympiad. This was the first time an organizing committee had done both the Olympics and Paralympics, and the difference really showed. From the outset, the vision of the Paralympic Organizing Committee was to set new standards for how to stage the games. They focused on how they could enable great athletic performances. The Olympic and Paralympic organizing committees partnered with each other to streamline organizational elements. Paralympians were treated as elite athletes and therefore equal to Olympians, something which hadn't always happened. And after Sydney, that treatment would continue on at future games.
And I remember we've spoken to people who were at both Sydney and Atlanta and talked about how night and day those 2
Oh,
Paralympics were, that Atlanta, they felt how afterthought they were, and how in Sydney they were treated like the professional elite athletes that they are.
right. And we see that today. I mean, I wouldn't say it's happened all the time because Rio had problems, but it's happened. And I think it's getting better and better. And we're getting more into the mainstream. This We're still at a time where Paralympics is not, they're just trying to get into the mainstream. They do okay in Australia in terms of media coverage, but it's still hard to get the media attention. These Paralympics broke records in terms of ticket sales. They sold over 1 million tickets for the first time, with many people seeing Paralympic sport for the first time. And that helped change the attitudes of able-bodied people towards those with a disability. It got people interested in parasport. Depending on the source, some 360 to 400,000 plus school children got to see the games, another record, and that helped normalize parasport for younger generations. The games had record athlete participation, global broadcast coverage, merch sales, and media attendance. All staff and contractors had disability awareness training, and the media also focused on disability awareness leading up to the games. Lizzie proved to be a very popular mascot.
Yes, she had some staying power we've talked about.
After the Paralympics organizing committee disbanded, the Australian Paralympic Committee got the rights to Lizzie, and they still use her today. 'Cause I just saw on Instagram, they posted not long ago a video with Lizzie. That's also cool. That's another Paralympic mascot that has staying power because we've talked about how Blaze the Phoenix from Atlanta 1996 has been kept by another organization, and they use it. These games also drove the formation of what was to be called the Oceania Paralympic Committee. Australian para athletes benefited from higher funding ahead of the games. Paralympics Australia's Paralympic Preparation Program served as the blueprint for other talent development programs. Funding for the APC has grown steadily in the years following the Games. In 1999-2000, the Australian Sports Commission funded 2.81 million Australian dollars in grants to the APC and Paralympics and other disabled groups. In 24-25, the Sports Commission invested 54 million in Paralympic sport. So that's really grown in the following years. The organizing committee also did a Reaching the Community program that did wonders to educate school children and seniors and help change Australians' perceptions about disabilities. And I think importantly for the Paralympic movement, this games fostered better relations between the IOC and the IPC. And while the two organizations have been in conversation for many years, forward progress for the IPC really came with Sydney 2000. In October 2000, the organizations signed a memorandum of understanding that gave the IPC representation on IOC commissions. And then in June 2001, they signed another memorandum of understanding that stipulated an Olympic host city must also host the Paralympics. And that
And
was huge.
and now we see them doing so many things in concert, and now they have the advertising, together and the sponsorships together, and the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee are now one committee, so this is a big step forward in bringing those 2 movements together.
Yeah, and it really helps the Paralympic Committee, who is much smaller than the IOC. It really helps them in terms of being able to find hosts, like having to duplicate all this work that they don't necessarily have the resources to do. And they talked about in some of the things I read how they would have hard times finding host cities at all for the Paralympics. Nobody just really wanted to host them. Sydney was also the first Paralympic organizing committee to have better knowledge transfer systems in place. It was the first to create a detailed post games report for the Paralympics, like the Olympic side does, but now for the first time for the Paralympic side. It also had about 100 Greek postgraduate students working on the Paralympic operations who ended up working on Athens 24, or who ended up working on Athens 2004 Paralympics as well. And I had read a little bit about how disabled people in Athens and in Greece were seen quite differently. And there was allusions to the need for a lot of disability awareness education, but this program kind of helped train people up in order to make Athens a good experience. Accessibility around Sydney improved. Ahead of the games, many venues like the Opera House were not easily accessible, but many buildings made changes. Many streets also became easier to navigate for wheelchair users and those with visual impairments. Not everything they did was perfect, but the Sydney 2000 Paralympics pushed the movement and parasport forward in new ways that has helped the Paralympic movement grow. So overall, Sydney was able to use the games to project itself as a sophisticated city and showcase the country as a multicultural nation. Timing was also on Sydney's side. It hosted during a big growth in globalization at the beginning of a boom in international education and when new tourism markets like China were just opening up. And it was like right ahead of the big internet.com boom too. So it's just a lot of excitement going on.
This was the era where cities really saw the Olympics, especially, and then the Paralympics, as a way to introduce the city on the global stage. I remember Barcelona was very much of that ilk, where yeah, we've all heard of Barcelona, but what's this city about? And Sydney was kind of the pinnacle of that, especially for North Americans and probably Europeans. What is Sydney all about? It's a lot more than just this image of the opera house.
Yeah, and they also showed how Sydney and Australia could get stuff done. So this helped propel Australia and Sydney in as a global city economically. It spurred investor confidence. It improved the export industry as well. So Sydney really got a bump up in terms of not just being a place for tourism, it's a place to do business as well. Sydney also proved itself more than capable of hosting major sports events. Since then, the city's been a host for multiple mega events like the 2003 Rugby World Cup, which used some Olympic venues, also the 2015 Cricket World Cup, and the 2023 Women's World Cup, among others. And maybe more importantly for us, Sydney's games did not follow Atlanta 1996's example and become overly commercialized. So in a way, following Atlanta and producing the 2000 games the way they did a lot to recreate that feeling of Olympic spirit that we may have lost 4 years before. So 5 oys for Sydney. Sources for this: Alison used the Paralympics closing ceremonies video. I used realestate.com.au, Australasian Leisure Management, Australian Athletics, International Herald Tribune, ABC News, multiple contributors from that, Simon Darcy and Lois Appleby from Paralympic Legacies, SportNation.nz, the International Olympic Committee, Architecture AU, Paralympics Australia, the Daily Telegraph, Olympedia, the Olympics Study Center, Olympics.com, multiple contributors from the Sydney Morning Herald, Parliament of Australia, theconversation.com, Sydney Metro, TCS Sydney Marathon, Tourism Research Australia, apartments.com.au, and the Australian Sports Commission. We'll have a link to all of our sources in the show notes.
I was just thinking, we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but of the 12 stories that we've done each, do you have a favorite of yours?
Let me look.
Because I have a favorite of yours.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, I do like Rulon Gardner. That's a good story. You can't go wrong with Rulon Gardner. I mean, they're all interesting in their own ways. And I think it's the pleasant surprise of finding a story I didn't know about, which, of course, with as many thousands of athletes that are there are thousands and thousands of stories that you just don't know. And so uncovering some of those were really good. But yeah, looking at the quick list, maybe Roman, Greco-Roman.
My favorite of yours was actually the Marion Jones story, which is probably
Really?
the saddest story we told, but just the twists and turns of that and how much more complicated that era of doping was is so
Oh,
important for us to remember.
and the Balco guy, he just died. Victor Conti, the Balco founder, at the center of the steroid scandal for Barry Bonds, Jason Giambi, baseball players, and Marion Jones died in November. He was 75 years old. So yeah, and I mean, it's tough. It's gotten really tough, and it's tough to see so many results that have been changed due to drugs, and so many people who did not get the medal ceremony at all, who did not get the medal ceremony that they thought they were going to get.
That they deserved.
Mhm. And the benefits that come with being a medalist. I mean, we've talked about this before, but yeah, just how much doping really hurt, and it really put a tarnish on some of the performances of these games.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about your favorite story?
I want to say Kathy Freeman because it's always talk about a feel good story. But I think the story that means the most to me is the gymnastics one because that was literally the story I wanted to tell since we've been doing the show, where the vault was set at the wrong height and what that did to the gymnasts in that women's all around competition.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you got into that because it was just a horrible thing to have happened.
Just simple mistake, and yet it altered the lives of every girl in that competition.
Right, and luckily did not cause any horrible accidents.
Oh, it
I mean,
did.
well, I
Some
mean,
yeah, I mean, nothing
like death,
permanent.
not
Yeah,
death,
nobody
but
died, which they could have. I mean, honestly.
yeah, I mean, it was just when you see that over and over that all these athletes are falling, and it's at the time a sport where you don't speak up.
Right.
That was a tough one. That was a really tough one. But of course, you got to do wheelchair rugby too, which was
Oh,
awesome.
the amount of wheelchair rugby I got to watch of that story was so much more than I needed to watch for the story. But I said, "Oh, but it's for work. I gotta watch this. I gotta watch the whole tournament." So was it the greatest games ever? It's gotta be in the top 5.
Right, right. Because of course now we have the hindsight of 25 more years of games. Oh, so after that we have Athens, not a hugely great summer games. Not bad, but I mean, at the Athens legacy, I think is really, with all the white elephant venues, has really tarnished the reputation of those games. But they were also the games that had shot put at Olympia, and that was just a magical event. So, ups and downs. Every games has ups and downs, of course. China, Beijing, 2008, coming out to the world, that incredible bird's nest venue.
I'm thinking if I had to make like a top 5 of the of my lifetime,
Okay.
LA 84, Sydney 2000. This
Mhm.
is in no particular order.
Yeah, yeah, and this is summer only.
This is summer only. London 2012.
Mhm.
I'm gonna have to put Paris on there just because we were there, and it was probably one of the greatest experiences of my life.
Yes, but I also think it was a great
I think
games.
it was a great games. And that's kinda where I have a top 4 of the past 50 years.
Yeah. I mean, because Montreal was okay.
But
Munich,
the
of course, we
legacy,
don't, yeah, the
went
legacy
to
is bad
Munich.
on Montreal. Munich sadly has just such a sad legacy. And 80, we don't know and probably
Right.
wouldn't put it at the top.
And Seoul, we did already, and we saw so many of those stories from Seoul that were just heartbreaking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And,
Barcelona.
Barcelona, I'd put Barcelona. Barcelona was a good
Okay.
games.
Well,
I'd
you
put that
love
in
that
my top.
opening ceremony
Yeah,
more
well,
than
it's a
all the
good, oh
others.
my gosh, it's such a good, what a cauldron lighting. But I think opening ceremonies is a different story because or
Oh,
cauldron
yeah.
lightings are a different story because
Yes.
Muhammad Ali is right up there at the top of mine too. Will never not make me cry.
There you go.
Yeah, it is when you start putting together a top 5, you realize, "Oh, thank goodness there aren't that many games in our lifetime."
But something that wasn't in our lifetime, the games for next year, yeah, 1956 Cortina d'Ampezzo, where they use the full name. It's not just Cortina.
Yes, so, uh, much smaller games, much different games, and we will be putting together stories from those games.
So we'll be starting that
Whatever.
in March.
Perhaps we might do a preview of those games in January
Okay.
just because there's gonna be a lot on Cortina 1956. I'm sure it's gonna get referenced on the coverage of those games, and hopefully we'll be able to get to Cortina at some point to see what is left. And we'll get to enjoy curling is in the original stadium, so hopefully that will be going well,
Plug for the
I guess.
fundraiser
Right.
and transportation.
Right, right. So yes, if you can help our fundraiser, help us get to Milano Cortina so we can give you the most fun and most realistic coverage of the 2026 Winter Olympics. Please visit flamealivepod.com and look for the Milano Cortina fundraiser. And that is going to do it for this episode. Playing this again.
This is Lori Luskery from Oak Park, Illinois, saying thanks so much for listening, and until next time, keep the flame alive.